Dane Rose, and I want to thank you for joining me in week 23 of this year-long blog of exceptional growth and well-being. And in this week, I want to focus on imagination. Imagination going in a particular area. What would you do if? And the purpose of this is to get a sense of how much of your life, if we kind of make a box with two quadrants in it, and the one is fear, limitations, and the other is preference and values. We want to get a sense of how much of your current life is being lived out of fear and limitations. Limitations such as not enough money, which really, in a world where it is relatively easy to make money, meaning it's a lot easier to make money than it is to, design a new space station or Elon Musk's mission to bring the species to Mars. I mean, money is pretty easy compared to some of the big goals. Just because money tends to get used as such an excuse for not doing things, it's also worth mentioning, given that most people who really put their minds to being of service and creating value over a 10 to 20 year period do create enough money. That if we're not actively, passionately doing things day by day to create more money, then the idea that money is the limitation as opposed to our lack of motivation to learn about and create money, which means it's really an issue of motivation or an issue of fear of failure, etc. So fear and limitations and scarcity have a certain algorithm. And it's important to be compassionate with those fears, etc., because one of the biggest fears and one of the biggest reasons that a certain demographic of people have a much easier go of, for example, making money, even if they're starting with nothing, is that when we're familiar with something, when we grow up in a certain world where lots of money is a part of it, it is not an unknown phenomena. And human beings have an innate fear of the unknown that often stems from initial childhood trauma. The projection of the dangers that we do know onto the rest of the universe that we don't know. And in doing so, being afraid, more afraid of the unknown than the known danger. And so fear and limitations are a big challenge for each of us to work with. And preference and values are a big goal to move more of our life towards preferences and values. So what we want to look at is how much of our life is doing, being, buying, saying, learning, loving, and being loved in the way that is closest to our values. So what would you do if you could do anything for a 3 to 5 year period? If you could do anything. Now, we're not breaking the laws of physics for this. We're not breaking the laws of irrationality, meaning, I would be living on Mars in the next 3 years. That's a little bit of a stretch. Though not entirely. It's still a valuable exercise to go out that far. But you want to answer the question in a way that it is physically possible to do it. And the most potent way is, of course, to create a reality where you could do it if you learn just a few more skills that you can learn. And that the only thing is holding you back is fear of the unknown, not having enough money right now and not having the imagination or the sense of how to get that money. What would you do? Who would you be if you could be anyone? Who do you admire and want to be more like? And is that for the popularity, sex appeal, popularity, power, etc. of the person? Or is that because you enjoy or imagine you would enjoy being that way, even if no one was around? So we're looking at not only who you want to be, but why you want to be. And again, how much of that is fear-based in the sense of, I want to be popular so I'm not alone, etc., as opposed to, I don't care what anyone else thinks. I don't care whether it's a popular trait or not. I love the experience of being this way. A good example of that might be innocence. The innocence in the classic Tarot sense of the card that's known as the Fool. The one that can go to extraordinary places because while everyone says it can't be done, like Elon Musk had this with SpaceX and Tesla. It's a really beautiful book, Elon Musk, by Ashley Vance. But because you have his friends, you have his wife, you have shareholders, you have investors up the wazoo, you have all the publications, you have all the major car companies, you have politicians, you have astronauts, all hammering on this guy and saying, this cannot be done. You are an absolute fool. You're going to lose everything, and it's your own fault because, you can't do this. And Elon is betting with physics against the entire world and comes out. And he's even betting against himself because he thinks there's maybe a 30% chance that he can do it. 30% chance Tesla would work, 30% SpaceX would work. But he thinks it's important enough to take that risk. And now, of course, everyone says, well, of course, but back when he was beginning, a private company had never, in fact, no government had ever done what Elon's done with SpaceX. There isn't a single government around the globe that can pull a rocket off for the cost and the environmental sensitivity and the functionality, etc., of Elon's rockets. So he's not only done what no private person has ever done before, he's done what no government has ever done before. And but the Fool, with all of its wonder and innocence and doorways into new worlds, is often scoffed and unpopular in modern culture. But, as Einstein discovered in, the dreams and fantasies of relativity, the Fool is a magical place to be. It's a magical place to be. What would you buy if you could buy anything? So let's give you $1 billion. What would you buy with $1 billion? How would you spend $1 billion? What would you do with it? In detail. And why would you buy it? All about you, all about others. Would you feel guilty? This is a chance in imagination to really get a sense of, what would it be like to have $1 billion? Would you give loans to family? Would you give gifts? How would you feel if people keep showing up when you need money? What do you think the reality would be if you had $1 billion, and what's your plan for spending it? I had a great time on this exercise, how I would spend $1 billion. What would you say if you could say anything without being punished? Meaning, if you could say anything to anyone without fear of reprisals, but because it was important to you to say it. Tell a boss, the stuff that you feel the boss needs to hear. Tell your children stuff they need to hear. Tell your parents stuff that you feel is important to say. What would you say if you could say anything to anyone? Would you say something to your favorite rock star or your teacher or your church? What would you say? What would you learn if you could learn any skill? If you could snap your fingers 2 or 3 times and you knew how to do X that you don't know how to do, whether it's fly a plane, make amazing love, have out-of-body experiences, laugh with true abandonment and freedom, create the kind of friends that you've dreamed about but haven't developed the skill to create. What would you learn if you could learn anything? And now you knew how to do that with confidence. Who would you love if you could love anyone at all? Who would you love? I wrote a book called Faces of Love, and this might be useful to also understand, what do you mean by love? Do you mean lust? Do you mean secure emotional attachment? Do you mean idolization and or presence, joy in the presence? Do you mean the discipline of helping someone out in the way that they can receive help? What form of love would your love take? And who would you love? 1, 2, or 3 people, if you could love anyone. And who would you like to be loved by if you could be loved by anyone? And again, are you talking about lust, meaning if anyone would have sex with you? Are you talking about if anyone had a secure emotional attachment? Are you talking about idyllic, more spiritual, romantic love, without the sex, just the wonder, the joy in each other's presence, the sense of friendship and camaraderie, the sense of safety to share anything? What kind of love would you, and how would you like to be loved by those 1, 2, or 3 people? And if you write this out, you need to write these out to sort with it, and you feel excitement. The first thing, comes up is, how big is the gap? So you are doing this, you're being this, you have this, you do say and don't say this, you know and you don't know this. So here's where you are, and then here's where you want to be. So how big is the gap in each of these things, and as an entire area? How much of your life is, very focused on this, which you might say, since these are your top priorities, preferences, and values, and how much of your life is focused on fear and limitations? I'd love to say this thing, but I'm really scared. I would put my foot in my mouth. I'd feel a complete idiot, and nothing good would happen. I'd love to love this person, but I feel inferior, and so I'm not going to even bother. I'd love to be loved by this person, and again, I feel, out of my league, whatever. I'd love to learn this stuff, but I haven't even gotten a book out on the topic because it doesn't feel like me somehow. I'm a loser, or I'm a this, or, I'm afraid I'll start and then I'll feel disappointed, etc. I'd love to say these things. Again, I'd be punished. If I could buy anything, I would do this. But it's just more fun to have a fantasy rather than to build a business or set a variety of income possibilities into place so that I can save up for that. And in terms of being, I'd love to be this, but that's very unpopular and all this, and I just don't want to be teased or something. And I love to do this, but, I've got to do this horrible job, etc., etc. And if I lose that job, maybe there isn't. So you want to get to know the stories that are why you have this gap. And you also, the most important thing, because if you have enormous goals, creating a big gap, is, do you think you're heading in the right direction? Are you saving any money and or learning skills that would help you earn more, increase your value? Are you closer than you were or further away? I had a rude awakening when I was 38. I just turned 43. And my rude awakening was that I felt more impatient and more bitter than I had 10 years prior. And I was looking at my dad. My dad's one of my negative role models. So, if I see, that both the positive and the negative aspects of my father in me. And so, he's just recently died. And I would say his life has kind of gone downhill until his death. And so one of the things that I get to do is kind of say, well, what did Dad do to go from here that brought him down to here? What did he do that went from here that brought him down to here? What did he do? And then what am I doing? And this is valuable with our parents because they set templates, meaning that unless we do something to buck the template that is laid down, there is a field of high probability that we will fall into the pattern, the rhythm that was set by our parents. And so, for example, I realized that, but I also, so I realized that, I'd become more bitter, more cynical through disappointments in relationship, not in career, but, in relationship. And I realized, I said, what's the thing that if Dad had done that at age 38, he would not be, bitter, punishing, and cynical today? And I thought about it. And I said, if he had made a bucket list at age 38 and done everything on it, and thus had little or no regrets in that area. He gave himself all of that. I don't think he'd be bitter and cynical, getting worse. And so that's what I did. I said, I don't want to be like him in another 20 years. And I can see that as a possibility. So let me create a bucket list. I did. I created a 20-item bucket list. And I gave myself a year, and I gave myself $30,000 to do everything on that bucket list. I wrote 2 books. Interestingly, one of the books makes me $100,000 a year, which kind of goes against the idea, oh, I can't afford that. Yes, I couldn't have responsibly afforded to do all that bucket list if you're just splurging on luxury. One of my bucket list items was to go to an Asian country. I'd never been to Asia. And spend 2 weeks in absolute luxury and meet someone really neat. I did it, and it completely changed my life. It was an absolutely phenomenal experience, and I'm in Thailand today because I did that. And yeah, but I can't spend 30 grand. But one of the other goals was I wanted to write a book. Now, I wanted to write 2 books. One didn't make me a penny. So everything cost money, but this one book that dovetailed into my business and was a specialty niche book just for my region in landscape design, that book brings in $100,000 of work. In fact, my last job was a $160,000 job, directly coming from someone who got the book in the library, said, I liked your book, we'd like you to do our project. Simple as that. And I wanted to write that book as part of my bucket list, So I did the 20 items, and I experimented with this and that and the other, and the cynicism lifted, the bitterness lifted, the sense of lack of growth and I'm not going anywhere lifted for several years. And one of the crises that most people don't talk about is what I call a success crisis. This is the crisis when you stop growing because you've already achieved your goal. And it's a little bit like when you got a fast motorbike or motorboat, you're cruising along at high speed and then you arrive and there's no more adrenaline and stuff. And then all the wake of the water rushes back and pushes up against the boat and can sometimes swamp a low motorboat because the engine isn't jetting that water back, and there's a sense of stagnation. And so the crisis of success is, you get your material life the way you want it. Now there's no adrenaline, no high growth in that arena. Now there comes to be stagnation, which feels worse than not having your goal, but working really hard towards it, working towards something. So then I do everything on my bucket list, and then that's done. It's like hang gliding, kite surfing, traveling, toys, this, that, and the other, all the little things that buying myself an electric motorbike, these were just things that I made up to create growth. Learning how to fly radio control planes, a fun project. Then the bucket list is done. And it's like, oh my gosh, well, stagnation again. And, so then, and nobody tells you, okay, they just say, okay, you become successful and you live happily ever after. No, you become successful, you either become imprisoned in that success, or you start stagnating and it's not as fun, or you have to create a new identity, a new goal, And so, after this, then the bucket list, now it's a nonprofit and figuring all that out. And it's tons of fun, so that's that's the process. So I would love to hear if you do any of this, number one. Number two, does it work for you? And when I'm reading comments on really beautiful presentations, because it's a real gift of generosity if anyone takes the time to share something they know in the hopes that it might help someone somewhere sometime. I think that needs to be honored, and I always feel upset when I'm reading a really beautiful presentation and I got some value from a speaker and something, and then there's these comments like, weird accent, huh? What's his hair? What was he thinking with that hairdo? That's a useless point. You should try this video over here. And it just seems so insulting to the person speaking and the person commenting, both. And so I have my assistant moderate any of the talks that I do, so that they don't become a hosting ground for deliberately hostile, dishonoring, comments, but that anyone with a question or anything to give to the conversation, like, that's a good idea, this is an even better one, that's a contribution, that's giving. Tried this, it didn't work. Tried this and it did work. That's a contribution. That's giving value to the audience. And so those things will be passed through and apply. But one of the other things that I'm doing this for is for you. So that if you do write a helpful comment or share this or that you do not have to receive irritating, insulting comments as you're trying to learn, grow, take a step. So just to let you know that piece of it, and I will see you on the next video.